Everywhere you look, people want shortcuts. They want easy money, easy success, easy recognition. But here's the truth. If it were easy, everyone would do it. And if everyone did it, it wouldn't matter. The problem we're going to solve today is this: why do the hardest paths create the most powerful results? And why did Steve Jobs believe that struggle itself was the core ingredient of greatness? This isn't the polished story you've heard 100 times. This is about the darker side of Jobs' lessons, the ones that remind us why it's supposed to be hard. Let me tell you something most people will never accept because it's uncomfortable. Success is not born in comfort. It is not born in convenience or in the illusion of shortcuts. Success is born in hardship, and that's not a poetic metaphor. That is the raw truth. Steve Jobs understood this in a way that most people never will. He lived it. When he built Apple in a garage with almost nothing but an idea and an obsession, there was no safety net, no guarantees, no crowd cheering. It was a struggle. It was rejection. It was nights of frustration. And yet that hardship was not a curse. It was the pathway. It was the forge that turned vision into mastery. Jobs once said, "I'm convinced that about half of what separates successful entrepreneurs from non-successful ones is pure perseverance." He wasn't exaggerating. He meant that when you strip away luck, timing, and talent, what remains is the ability to keep moving forward when everything around you tells you to stop. Think about this. When Steve was pushed out of his own company, when the board of Apple decided he wasn't the right leader, that moment could have been the end of his story. For most people, it would have been. Imagine creating something with your bare hands, nurturing it like a child, and then being told you're no longer worthy of it. That kind of rejection, that kind of humiliation, would have destroyed almost anyone. But Steve didn't let it end him. Instead, he transformed it into fuel. He went on to build Next. He revived Pixar. And those ventures, born out of hardship, ended up becoming some of the most important stepping stones to the second rise of Apple. Without the hardship, without being thrown out into the fire, the second version of Jobs, the version that returned to Apple and changed the world with the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, would not have existed. This is why hardship is not the enemy. It is the test. It is life's way of asking you, do you actually want this? Do you want it badly enough to suffer for it? Badly enough to face humiliation, rejection, loneliness, and still get up the next morning and keep building? Because if the answer is no, then maybe you don't deserve mastery. Jobs never romanticized the struggle. He didn't pretend it was fun. He didn't say it was glamorous. He admitted that there were nights he wanted to quit, moments where he doubted himself, moments where the weight of failure felt unbearable. But he kept going because he understood something crucial: mastery is never given, it is earned. And the only currency you can pay with is pain, persistence, and patience. Most people will never see this because the world has sold them a lie. The lie of ease. The lie that you can hack your way to greatness, that you can skip the grind and still reach the summit. But Jobs proved that greatness cannot be downloaded. It cannot be outsourced. It cannot be bought. It has to be built, brick by brick, mistake by mistake, rejection by rejection. Hardship is the filter. It separates the ones who kind of want it from the ones who cannot live without it. And that's why Steve kept going when others quit. That's why he saw possibilities where others saw dead ends. The hardship broke weaker minds, but it sharpened his. If you're facing hardship right now, if you're doubting yourself, if the world is telling you that you're not good enough, that you don't have what it takes, understand this: you are standing exactly where Jobs once stood. And in that fire, you are being asked the same question he was asked. Will you keep moving? Will you keep building? Will you let hardship destroy you, or will you let it create you? Because mastery is not for those who run when things get hard. Mastery is for those who endure, who keep walking into the storm with nothing but belief in their vision. That's the path Jobs walked. That's the path every revolutionary must walk. And that's why hardship will always be the pathway to mastery. Rejection. It's a word people fear more than failure itself. And yet, for Steve Jobs, rejection wasn't the end of a path. It was the ignition point for transformation. To him, rejection wasn't a wall. It was a mirror, a brutal reminder of where you stood, and more importantly, where you needed to go. When Jobs tried to convince investors in the early days of Apple, most of them laughed him out of the room. They didn't believe in a couple of kids in a garage. They didn't believe in a computer that ordinary people would use in their homes. To them, the idea was absurd, impractical, unworthy of serious attention. That rejection, those dismissive stares, could have been enough to bury the dream. But it didn't. Steve understood that rejection wasn't proof he was wrong. It was proof he was ahead of his time. He was rejected again when the very company he built, Apple, turned against him. The board stripped him of his power, and he was forced to leave. Imagine that, being rejected not by strangers, but by the very creation you poured your soul into. Most people would have been crushed, maybe even disappeared into bitterness. But Steve took that rejection and turned it into a weapon. He channeled it into building Nextdoor, a company designed around his vision of the future. He took it into Pixar, nurturing an animation studio that many thought would fail, and turned it into one of the greatest storytelling empires of all time. The irony is that rejection forced him to reinvent himself, and in doing so, he became stronger, sharper, more resilient. When he finally returned to Apple, he wasn't the same man who left. He was hardened, refined by rejection, armed with clarity and vision that would lead to some of the most groundbreaking products the world has ever seen. Jobs knew that rejection had a hidden gift. It cuts away the unnecessary. It removes the false believers who were only with you when things were easy. It strips you of illusions and leaves you with something far more valuable, the truth. The truth of who you are. The truth of what you stand for. The truth of whether you believe in your vision strongly enough to keep going when no one else believes with you. Every no he heard, every door that slammed shut, every boardroom that voted him out, those weren't failures. They were filters. And that's what rejection truly is. A filter. It filters out the noise, the shallow approval, the easy path. What remains is raw determination. What remains is the question, how badly do you want this? Think about your own life. How often do you stop after rejection? How often do you take a no as proof that you're not worthy, when in reality, it's proof that you're being tested? Steve understood that rejection is a test of endurance, not a verdict. It doesn't say you're unworthy. It asks if you're willing to keep walking when the world shuts its doors. And that's the difference between ordinary and extraordinary. The ordinary shrink from rejection. They let it define them, they let it dictate their worth. The extraordinary absorb rejection, learn from it, sharpen their vision, and keep moving forward. Jobs didn't just accept rejection. He embraced it. He knew it was shaping him, chiseling him, making him dangerous in the best possible way. This is why rejection is power. Because it forces you to refine your vision until it's undeniable. It forces you to become resilient enough to withstand storms that most people could never survive. It forces you to find strength not in applause, not in approval, but in the unshakable belief that what you're building matters. Rejection didn't weaken Steve Jobs. It was the very thing that made him unstoppable. It stripped him down, burned him, broke him, and then rebuilt him into someone capable of changing the world. And if you're willing to embrace rejection, not fear it, not run from it, but embrace it, it can do the same for you. Obsession. It's a word people throw around casually. But for Steve Jobs, he wasn't casual. It was life itself. He wasn't interested in balance, in moderation, in being reasonable. He was obsessed. Obsessed with design, obsessed with perfection, obsessed with building something so profound it would outlive him. And people hated him for it. They called him controlling. They called him demanding. They called him impossible to work with. But the truth is this: without that obsession, there would be no revolution. Without that obsession, there would be no Apple as we know it. Jobs believed that obsession was the proof that you truly cared, that it mattered enough to consume you, to pull you into sleepless nights, to drive you beyond what most people would ever attempt. He would agonize over the shade of gray on a user interface, the curve of an edge on a device, the way a box would feel when you opened it for the first time. To others, it looked like madness. But to Steve, it was the difference between something ordinary and something unforgettable. The world teaches you to play safe, to find balance, to avoid extremes. But look at the people who change the world. They are not balanced. They are not reasonable. They are obsessed. They see something no one else sees, and they cannot let it go until it becomes real. That's what Jobs embodied. He didn't just want to build products. He wanted to build experiences. He wanted every person who touched an Apple product to feel something they had never felt before. And that kind of ambition is not born out of casual interest. It is born out of obsession. Jobs would often repeat this truth. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. And the only way to show people something revolutionary is to push yourself into places they cannot imagine. That means rejecting good enough. That means rejecting compromise. That means being so obsessed with your vision that you're willing to suffer for it. And Steve suffered for it. His obsession cost him relationships. It cost him friendships. And it cost him the approval of many people who worked with him. But in the end, his obsession also gave us the Macintosh, the iPhone, Pixar films that touched the world, and a new standard for design and technology that redefined entire industries. That is the paradox of obsession. It is painful. It is demanding, it is isolating, and yet it is the birthplace of greatness. Obsession forces you to see details no one else cares about. It forces you to push past limits that others accept as permanent. It forces you to hold on to a vision long enough for the world to finally catch up. Without obsession, the critics win. Without obsession, you compromise. Without obsession, the dream dies before it ever breathes. People often ask, isn't obsession unhealthy? And the answer, according to Jobs, is that maybe it is. But what's worse, to live an unhealthy life consumed by a vision that changes the world, or to live a healthy, balanced life that leaves nothing behind. He chose obsession, and history will never forget him because of it. The beauty of obsession lies in its clarity. When you are obsessed, distractions disappear, doubts fade. The noise of other people's opinions becomes irrelevant. There is only the vision and the relentless pursuit of bringing it to life. That is why Steve Jobs could walk into a room, demand the impossible, and make people believe they could achieve it. His obsession infected them. It pushed teams to produce work they never thought possible. It created products that seemed like they belonged to the future, because in his mind they already did. You see, obsession is not about control. It is about devotion. It is about giving every part of yourself to something bigger than yourself. It is about refusing to settle, refusing to compromise, refusing to live a life that does not burn with meaning. That is the beauty of obsession. And that is why Steve Jobs never apologized for being obsessed, because he understood that while obsession is heavy, obsession is lonely, and obsession is relentless, it is also the single most powerful force that can take an idea and make it immortal. Darkness. Most people fear it. They think it's the end of the road, the proof that they've lost their way. But for Steve Jobs, darkness was not an enemy. It was a teacher. It was the crucible where vision was sharpened, where illusions were stripped away, where truth revealed itself. Darkness builds vision. When Jobs was forced out of Apple in 1985, it wasn't just a setback. It was devastating. He was a man who had poured every ounce of himself into a company, only to be told he wasn't good enough to lead it. In that moment, everything he had built was gone. Fame didn't matter. Fortune didn't matter. The spotlight had vanished, and what was left was silence. Most people would have disappeared into that silence. But Jobs didn't. He lived inside it. He let the darkness strip him bare, and in that emptiness, he began to see with clarity. It was in those years of exile that he rediscovered himself. He realized that his true passion wasn't about running a corporation or being admired. It was about building tools that could change lives. Darkness took away the applause, the titles, the illusions of success, and what remained was the pure essence of his vision. That's why he built NXT. That's why he poured himself into Pixar. Because the darkness forced him to ask the most important question: why are you doing this? And the answer was never money. It was never power. It was always about creating something meaningful. Darkness is not comfortable. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't protect you. It strips you down until only the truth remains. Jobs understood that in those nights of doubt, when failure seemed permanent, something powerful was happening. The noise of the world was gone, and what remained was focus. Focus on what mattered most. Focus on what cannot be taken away. And here's the paradox: the very products that defined Apple's comeback, the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, were born not in the light of comfort, but in the darkness of Jobs' exile. That vision, sharpened by rejection and loneliness, became the foundation for Apple's greatest era. Without the darkness, there would be no revolution. Without the darkness, there would be no clarity. Most people run from the dark. They hide from failure, from rejection, from moments of silence where no one is cheering for them. But Jobs leaned into it. He let it break him, so it could rebuild him. And in that process, he found something most people never find: the ability to see beyond the present, to see beyond what is obvious, to see into the future. Darkness builds vision because it forces you to stop lying to yourself. When the crowd is gone, when the recognition is stripped away, when the easy options disappear, you are left face with yourself. Do you still believe in your dream when no one else does? Do you still fight for it when the world has turned its back on you? That's the test. That's the gift. Jobs learned that vision isn't about pleasing the world. Vision is about clarity, and clarity only comes when you walk through the shadows. He understood that the hardest times were also the most revealing. When everything else falls apart, what remains is what truly matters. For him, it was always about creating tools for the mind, empowering people to unleash their creativity, and building something that left a mark on humanity. That kind of vision doesn't come from comfort. It comes from darkness. So the next time you find yourself lost, doubting, facing rejection, stripped of recognition, remember what Jobs discovered. The darkness you fear is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It is the space where illusions die and vision is born. It is the silence where clarity finally speaks. Darkness builds vision, and only those who walk through it can see the world in a way no one else can. So here's the truth Steve Jobs understood better than most. Life isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to test you. Hardship is the pathway to mastery, because only through struggle do you sharpen yourself into someone capable of greatness. Rejection isn't the end. It's the fire that burns away weakness and leaves only resilience. Obsession isn't madness. It's the devotion that carries a vision further than anyone else dares to go. And darkness, the place most people fear, is the place where clarity is born, where vision takes shape, and where leaders are forged. Jobs lived these lessons. He suffered them. He embraced them. And they became the foundation of the revolution he built. That's why his story isn't just about technology. It's about the raw truth of what it takes to create something that lasts. It's supposed to be hard, because if it weren't, it would never matter. And the ones willing to walk through the hardship, the rejection, the obsession, the darkness, those are the ones who change the world.